I remember as if it were yesterday the day my world collapsed. It was almost 23 years of marriage. 23 years when I woke up every day thinking about how to make Roberto happy, how to be the best wife he could have. I cooked his favorite dishes, ironed his shirts with the care of someone smoothing rose petals, listened to his work complaints with infinite patience. I dedicated myself to that man as if he were my religion, my purpose, my reason for existing. But on that September day, when the clock marked 6:30 in the evening and the sky was tinged with orange, Roberto came home with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was something worse. It was indifference. An emptiness in the eyes that looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if all those years together meant absolutely nothing. He entered through the kitchen door where I was preparing dinner, a beef stew he always loved, and didn't even greet me. He just dropped his briefcase on the sofa and said we needed to talk. My heart immediately raced, that feeling of premonition that sometimes visits us without warning, that cold in the stomach that says something terrible is about to happen. I dried my hands on the apron and went to the living room, sat on the sofa where we had watched movies embracing so many times, where we celebrated birthdays, where we built what I thought was a solid and true life. Roberto stood up, didn't even have the decency to sit beside me to say what he had to say. He started talking about how he hadn't been happy for a long time, that he felt life was passing and he wasn't truly living, that he deserved more, that he deserved to be happy because life was only one and he didn't want to waste it. I heard each word as if they were knives slowly entering my chest, but I still had hope that this was just a crisis, something we could solve together, as we always solved everything. So I asked what I could do to help him, so we could be happy together again. And that's when he released the words that marked me forever, words that echo in my head even today when I least expect it. He said the problem was me, that I had aged, that my black skin embarrassed him when we went out together, that he couldn't stand being seen with an old black woman by his side anymore, that his work colleagues made jokes, that he deserved someone young, beautiful, someone who made him feel alive again. Each word was a punch, each syllable a humiliation that accumulated inside me like poison. I was paralyzed, unable to process that this man I loved, whom I had cared for during 2 decades, whom I had supported when he lost his job, whom I had consoled when his mother died, was there telling me I was worthless because my skin was dark and because I had aged beside him. I tried to speak, tried to say something, but my voice wouldn't come out. My throat was closed, as if an invisible hand was squeezing it. Roberto continued, merciless, saying he had met someone, a 25-year-old woman, white, beautiful, full of life, and that he was leaving with her, that he had already rented an apartment, that he wanted the divorce as quickly as possible. He said all this looking at me as if I were an old piece of furniture he was discarding, without any trace of affection or respect for everything we lived together. When he finished, he simply grabbed a suitcase that was already packed in the bedroom and left through the door, leaving me there alone, destroyed, groundless, not understanding how my life had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. I spent that entire night awake, sitting on the living room floor, hugging my knees, crying until I had no more tears, feeling a pain so deep it seemed physical, as if someone had torn a part of me away. I looked in the mirror the next day and saw a woman I didn't recognize, a woman with swollen eyes, face aged by pain, and for the first time in my life, I hated myself. I hated my skin. I hated my wrinkles. I hated every inch of me that Roberto had rejected. The following days were a blur of suffering. I could barely get out of bed, could barely eat, and when I did, it was just to not faint. My sister Conseyaku showed up at my house a week later, worried because I wasn't answering the phone, and when she saw me in that state, she almost called an ambulance. She hugged me tight and cried with me, said Roberto was an idiot, a coward, that I deserved much more. But her words didn't reach the hole that had formed inside me. The divorce process was quick and cruel. Roberto wanted to get rid of me as quickly as possible to start his new life, and I didn't have the strength to fight. He kept almost everything: the big house we bought together, the better car, the savings I had helped build working as a teacher during all those years. I was left with almost nothing, just some furniture and a small apartment I managed to rent with the little money that remained. People in the neighborhood started talking. Pitying looks followed me wherever I went. And I heard whispers about how Roberto had traded his old black wife for a young white girl. The humiliation was constant, suffocating, and there were days when I thought about simply giving up on everything, disappearing, ceasing to exist because the pain was too great to bear. But there was something inside me, a small but stubborn spark, that refused to completely extinguish. Maybe it was the memory of my grandmother, a strong black woman who had faced so much in life and never bowed. Or maybe it was just a survival instinct I didn't even know I possessed. I started therapy with a psychologist that Consecu recommended, and in the first sessions I could only cry, but gradually I began to speak, to let out all that pain, all that anger, all that feeling of inadequacy that Roberto had planted in me. The therapist helped me understand that the problem was never me, that my black skin was beautiful, that aging was natural and dignified, that Roberto was the one who was sick, full of prejudice and superficiality. Gradually, very slowly, I began to rebuild the pieces of myself that had been shattered. Part 2, the months passed, and I discovered a Helena who had been hidden during all those years of marriage. I started taking better care of myself, not to please anyone, but because I deserved it, because my body had carried me for 48 years and deserved affection and respect. I went back to walking in the park every morning, felt the sun on my skin, and thought about how beautiful that skin was, how it told the story of my ancestors, how it was part of a heritage I should celebrate and not hide. I started wearing colorful clothes, beautiful turbans that enhanced my face, and for the first time in a long time I felt beautiful looking in the mirror. I went back to dedicating myself to my teaching profession with renewed intensity, discovered that teaching was something that fulfilled me, that gave me purpose, and my students responded to this new energy with affection and admiration. I made new friends, incredible women who had also gone through pain and disillusionment, and who understood exactly what I was feeling. We met every week to talk, laugh, cry when necessary, and that group became my family, my safe harbor. I discovered there was life beyond Roberto, that I didn't need a man to validate my existence, that I was complete alone. But life had other plans for me, and a year and a half after the separation, I met Marcello. It was on a Saturday morning at the market. I was choosing tomatoes when I accidentally bumped into him, making some fruits he was carrying fall. I apologized, embarrassed, and we bent down together to pick everything up from the floor. And when our eyes met, I felt something I thought I would never feel again. A connection, a chemistry, something inexplicable that made me smile for real. Marcello was a few years younger than me. He was 42 years old. He was also black, with a wide smile and kind eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul. We talked right there in the market aisle for almost half an hour, about silly things at first, about the weather, about promotions. But gradually the conversation became deeper, more personal. He asked for my phone number and I gave it, half not believing that this was happening, half afraid of being disappointed again. But Marcello was different from everything I had known. He called me the next day and invited me for coffee, and from then on we started seeing each other regularly. He treated me like a queen, with a respect and admiration I had never experienced before. Marcello said my skin was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, that my expression lines told stories of a life lived with intensity, that my age was a symbol of wisdom and experience. He made me feel desired, important, valued in a way Roberto never did, not even at the beginning of our marriage. With Marcello I learned what true love was, a love that doesn't try to change the other, that accepts and celebrates who the person is, with all their imperfections and peculiarities. He was an architect, had a small but successful office. And gradually I got to know his family, beautiful and welcoming people who received me with open arms. His mother, Donna Eulalia, a strong black lady, like my grandmother, hugged me the first time we met and said she could see in my eyes that I was a woman of fiber, and that moved me deeply. 3 years after we met, Marcelo proposed to me on a starry night at the beach, kneeling in the sand with a simple but beautiful ring, saying he wanted to spend the rest of his life by my side. I cried, but this time they were tears of happiness, of gratitude, of true love. We got married in a small and intimate ceremony, surrounded only by people who really mattered, and it was the happiest day of my life. Marcelo wasn't rich, we didn't have a mansion or luxury cars, but we had something much more valuable. We had love, respect, partnership. We had built together a life that made sense. I had gone back to studying, did a specialization in inclusive education, and got a better position at the school where I worked. And for the first time in my life, I felt professionally fulfilled too. My life had completely transformed in the 5 years since Roberto left me. I was no longer that destroyed and humiliated woman who sat on the living room floor crying. I was a strong, independent, loved and happy woman. There were days when I thought about Roberto and felt sorry for him. Sorry for someone so empty who needed to humiliate another person to feel superior. Sorry for someone who confused appearance with essence, youth with value. But most of the time I didn't even think about him. He had become just a distant memory, a closed chapter of my life. Consecu always told me that life goes around, that those who plant wind harvest storm. But I never imagined I would witness this so literally. It was 5 years since the separation when it happened. It was a Tuesday morning I was going to work, walking down the main avenue as I did every day when I saw a street sweeper sweeping the sidewalk a few meters ahead. Something about him seemed familiar, the posture, the way of moving, but I couldn't identify what. As I approached, my heart began to beat faster. A strange sensation took over me. When I finally got close enough to see his face, I almost tripped over my own feet. It was Roberto. My ex-husband, the man who humiliated and abandoned me, was there in front of me dressed in the orange uniform of the city hall, sweeping the streets, with his face marked by time and suffering, much more aged than he should be. For a moment I was paralyzed, not knowing what to do, whether I should move on pretending I hadn't seen him, or if I should stop and say something. But before I could decide, our eyes met, and I saw in them an immediate recognition followed by something that looked like deep shame. Roberto dropped the broom and stood looking at me as if he was seeing a ghost, mouth half open, speechless. I could see he was different, not just older, but broken. There was a defeat in his drooping shoulders, in his worn clothes, in the way he looked at me, not with superiority, but with something that seemed like a mixture of regret and despair. I stood there on the sidewalk looking at Roberto, and 1,000 thoughts passed through my head in a matter of seconds. I remembered all the tears I cried because of him, all the sleepless nights, all the humiliation I endured. But I also remembered who I was now, the strong woman I had become, the true love I found, the full life I built. Roberto was the first to speak, his voice coming out trembling and low, almost a whisper. He said my name, Helena, and there was so much emotion in that word that, for an instant, I almost felt sorry. He began to explain without me having asked for any explanation, the words coming out stumbling as if he had rehearsed that speech 1,000 times in his head. He said everything had gone wrong, that the 25-year-old girl had left him after spending all his money, that she never truly loved him, she just wanted a comfortable life, and when the money ran out, she left. He told me he lost his job shortly after, that he tried to start his own business that went bankrupt, that he lost the house, the car, everything, and that now he worked as a street sweeper to survive. He said he lived in a small rented room in a boarding house, that he barely had money to eat, that his life had become hell. And then, with tears in his eyes, he asked for forgiveness. He said he had been the biggest idiot in the world, that he had thrown away the best thing he had in life, that I was an incredible woman, and he didn't know how to value me, that he regretted every day what he did to me, the horrible things he said. He begged for a second chance, said he still loved me, that he had never stopped loving me, that we could start over, that he would be different now, that he had learned his lesson. I listened to him in silence, without interrupting, observing every expression on his face, every word that came out of his mouth. And you know what I felt? Absolutely nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction at his fall, not desire for revenge, just a kind of peaceful emptiness. That man who was once my husband, who once had the power to destroy me with his words, was now there in front of me begging, but he meant nothing to me any more. It was like looking at a stranger, someone I knew in a past life, but who no longer had any connection with who I was now. When he finished speaking, I took a deep breath and spoke with a calmness that surprised me. I said I didn't feel anger toward him, that I had forgiven not for him, but for me, because carrying that weight no longer made sense. But I also made it clear that forgiving didn't mean forgetting, much less meant giving a second chance. I told him my life had changed completely, that I was happy now, really happy, that I had a wonderful husband who loved and respected me truly, that I had a career that fulfilled me, friends who supported me, a life full of meaning and purpose. I said that everything he did, all the humiliations he imposed on me, ended up freeing me from a relationship that was never healthy, even though I couldn't see it at the time. I explained that I learned my value never depended on him, that my black skin is beautiful and is a source of pride, that aging is a privilege not everyone has, that I am much more than he once made me believe I was. Roberto started crying openly right there on the street, tears running down his dusty face, and he continued begging, saying he had no one, that he was alone, that he needed me. But I wasn't moved, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally understood it wasn't my responsibility to save him, that he had made his choices and now needed to live with the consequences. I said firmly, but without anger, that he needed to move forward, find his own way to rebuild himself as I did, that he couldn't depend on me to feel complete or to solve the problems he created himself. I sincerely wished he would find peace and happiness, but I made it clear that it wouldn't be with me, that chapter was definitively closed. Before leaving, I said something I needed to say, not for him, but for myself. I said that for a long time I believed the horrible things he said about me, that I internalized that prejudice and that cruelty, but that now I knew the truth. The truth is, I was always worthy of love and respect, always beautiful and valuable, and the problem was never me, it was him. It was his distorted vision, his prejudices, his superficiality, his inability to truly love. I was free from all that now, free from the shadow he had cast over my life, and I had no intention of returning to that prison. When I finished speaking, I simply turned around and started walking, leaving Roberto standing there with his broom and his tears. I didn't look back, didn't feel the need to see his reaction, because that wasn't about him. It was about me, about my freedom, about my ability to move forward without carrying the weight of the past. As I walked down the avenue toward work, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time, as if a knot I didn't even know existed had finally come undone inside me. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to Marcelo, saying only that I loved him and could barely wait to see him tonight. He responded immediately with a bunch of heart emojis and saying he had a surprise for me, that he was going to make my favorite dish for dinner. I smiled looking at the phone screen and thought about how life was strange and wonderful at the same time. 5 years ago, I was destroyed, thinking my life was over, that I would never be happy again, that I had no value because a man I loved said I didn't. But look where I was now, strong, loved, fulfilled, walking with my head held high through the same streets where I used to lower my eyes with shame. Life really goes around, but not the way people think. It wasn't about Roberta having lost everything while I prospered. It wasn't about revenge or karma. It was about me having discovered I never needed his validation to be complete, that my happiness never depended on how he saw me, that I always had within me the strength necessary to rise again. The encounter with Roberto that morning was a gift, not because I enjoyed seeing him fallen, but because it clearly showed me how much I had evolved, how much I had grown, how much I was different from that scared and humiliated Helena from 5 years ago. I arrived at school still thinking about all this. And my students noticed I was different that day, more radiant, more present. I gave one of the best classes of my life, talking about resilience, about how difficulties can transform us into better people, about how our value doesn't depend on others' opinions. Some students came to talk to me afterward, saying that class had touched their hearts. And I realized my story, as painful as it had been, had a purpose. I could use my experience to inspire other people, to show it's possible to rise again even when everything seems lost. That our identity and dignity cannot be stolen by anyone, no matter how much they try. That night, when I got home, Marcelo was waiting for me with a beautiful dinner, candles lit, and soft music playing. He hugged me tight and asked what had happened, said he had sensed something different in my message earlier. I told him everything about the encounter with Roberto, about the words exchanged, about how I felt. Marcelo listened to me in silence, holding my hand. And when I finished, he pulled me into a tight hug and said he was proud of me, of the woman I was, of the strength I had. He said I deserved everything good life had to offer, and that he would spend the rest of his days reminding me of that. We had dinner talking about the future, about the plans we had, about the trip we wanted to take at the end of the year, about how nice it was to simply be there together, sharing life. And I realized that this was true happiness. Not that ephemeral happiness based on appearances and status, but that deep happiness that comes from being loved for who you really are, from having built a life with purpose and meaning. Roberto was right about one thing he said on that fateful day 5 years ago. Life is only one and we deserve to be happy. But he was wrong about everything else. Happiness is not trading one person for another, younger or lighter. It's not seeking external validation. It's not building your joy on top of someone else's humiliation. Happiness is accepting yourself. It's loving who you are. It's building true relationships based on respect and mutual admiration. It's having the courage to start over when necessary. It's understanding your value is intrinsic and doesn't depend on anyone. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a 53-year-old woman with hair starting to turn white, with wrinkles that tell stories of laughter and tears, with black skin that shines under the sunlight. And I love this woman. I love every little piece of her, every mark, every imperfection. This woman survived, fought, rose again, and found true happiness. Roberto did me a favor when he left, even though it took years for me to understand that. He freed me from a prison I didn't even know I was in. Forced me to discover who I really was beyond being his wife, taught me I was much stronger than I imagined. Life turned around, yes, but not in the way people expect in revenge stories. It turned around because I learnt to love myself, because I found people who truly love me, because I built a life worth living. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all.